I want to say at the outset that it is just so meaningful for me to be here today. I have come to this event for many years. I've sung these songs, I've heard these speakers, and so to be here in this capacity is truly, truly an honor, and I am so grateful and don't take it lightly. We gather every year to honor Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and that matters. Memory matters. But Dr. King did not live and ultimately die so that we would simply remember him. He lived so that we would be changed. And if we're honest, this is where things start to get uncomfortable, right? I've noticed something over the years. When a well-known figure dies, a musician, an actor, a public figure, suddenly everyone has a very favorite quote to share. Social media fills up with wisdom and wit we're meant to believe that has guided this person's life their whole time, when I suspect they found that quote 5 minutes ago on a web search. And if we're honest, we do that to Dr. King too, don't we? Every year, Martin Luther King Day rolls around, we quickly do a search for our favorite quote, throw it online. We distill him into something that fits neatly on a graphic. We choose quotes that make us feel wise, calm, reasonable. We polish him, we soften him, we make him safe. And in doing so, we often strip away the parts of Dr. King that actually cost him everything. I've watched my colleagues in Jefferson City, people in positions of great power, quote Dr. King on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, while simultaneously working to ban diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. I've heard his words invoked from the House floor by those who oppose voting access, who undermine labor, who resist fair housing, who work to keep certain people invisible or quiet. Dr. King becomes useful, but not followed. He becomes honored, but not heeded. And that's what I want to be clear about today, and what we're doing here today is, if we are brave enough to copy and paste his words, we should be wise enough to follow them. In his letter from the Birmingham jail, Dr. King warned us. He said, "We will have to repent in this generation not merely for the vitriolic words and actions of the bad people, but for the appalling silence of the good people." Not hatred alone, not violence alone, silence. And so, ironically, I will fill the next 15 minutes with sound to talk about silence. Because I really want to sit with that concept today. Because silence often feels reasonable. It rarely announces itself as a moral failure. It usually sounds like common sense. Silence tells us this is not the right time. Silence says, I don't want to make things worse. Silence whispers, someone else more qualified than me will take care of it. When my children were younger, they roughhoused like all kids do. They're both in their late teens, and sometimes they still roughhouse. One night, they were wrestling on one of their beds, and I noticed it. I knew I should say something about it, but the thing about my kids, and I'm grateful that they're here today to hear this, is that they've always been quick to give me the feedback that I am very quick to give feedback. And so in a rare moment of self-restraint, I stayed quiet. I didn't say anything. I didn't say be careful. By the end of the evening, I was in the emergency room with my daughter with a broken clavicle. Silence did not mean that I didn't care about her well-being. It meant I was avoiding conflict. I hesitated, and that hesitation had consequences. Dr. King understood something uncomfortable. Silence doesn't just happen when people don't care. Silence happens when people care, but are tired, uncertain, afraid. Right now, even though there is so much to be appalled at in our world, much of the harm in our country isn't loud. It's quiet. It's quieter than we realize. It happens through policy changes most people don't have time to read. It happens through decisions made far from the people that they affect. It happens when access to the ballot quietly narrows, when civil rights protections weaken without headlines, and when people disengage. Not because they don't love this country, but because they feel worn down by it. Silence in moments like these can feel polite. It can feel safe. It can feel like maturity, but silence is not neutral. Silence does not freeze injustice in place. It nurtures and grows it. It allows it to move forward unchanged, and momentum almost always favors the powerful over the vulnerable. Here in Missouri, we see how harm isn't always caused by malice. Sometimes it's caused by delay, or misdirection, or deliberate neglect. For example, as of late 2025, nearly 500 Missourians with serious mental illness, people found unable to participate in their own court cases, were still waiting in county jails for court-ordered treatment. Care the law says should happen promptly has been delayed for months and sometimes and often years, as the backlog has grown by nearly 88% in recent years. And it doesn't stop there. Missouri has repeatedly missed federal deadlines for processing Medicaid applications, with average wait times stretching well beyond the 45 days and almost double that. And the result is predictable and devastating. Children miss their care. Seniors skip medication. People with disabilities postpone their treatment. And certainly there are so many other grievous things that I could list, and come on down to Jeff City if you want to see them. But this doesn't happen by accident. It happens because leaders in Jeff City and places of power choose not to make them their priority. And that's not because the resources don't exist. It's because the people in charge have chosen to spend their time targeting already marginalized communities instead of fixing systems that are actively harming Missourians. Dr. King warned us that injustice is often maintained not just by loud cruelty, but by quiet decisions about what and who matters. When those with power choose culture wars over care, punishment over treatment, and delay over dignity, real people pay the price. Justice doesn't fail because we don't know what to do. It fails when those in authority decide not to do it. And Dr. King never confused discomfort with injustice. He didn't say silence was dangerous because people were bad. He said it was dangerous because it allowed injustice to become normal. He warned us about a society that prefers order over justice, about people who say they agree with the goal but not the method, about those who support progress, just not yet. And if Dr. King were speaking to us today, I don't think he'd be surprised by our moment. I think he would recognize it. He would recognize fear being used as a political tool. He would recognize the quiet and purposeful erosion of trust in democratic institutions, and he would recognize how easy it is to confuse exhaustion for wisdom. And he would remind us that silence always sides with power. I learned that lesson early in my career as a social worker when I was a caseworker at a community behavioral health center. I worked with people living with mental health and substance use challenges. And one of my clients, I'll call him Bob, was incredibly thoughtful. Our conversations were rich. I loved going over to his home, and like all of my clients, I learned so much more from him than he learned from me. In his 60s, Bob had several health complications alongside his mental health challenges, and over time he began having difficulty swallowing. He went to the doctor many times, and every time he would come back, he said, they're just not believing me, that I'm having difficulties. They're saying it's because I'm an alcoholic. They're saying it's because I have mental illness. They're saying it's because I'm poor. When he went to the doctor, his concerns were dismissed over and over and over. When he asked me to accompany him, I went with him, and I helped push back on the doctors, and I watched them tell Bob, no, it's just because you're an alcoholic. So I kept pushing back. I asked questions. I insisted they look closer. Tests were finally run, and they revealed esophageal cancer. If Bob had been believed sooner, if someone had listened, and the good people that work on the medical team had heard him, and someone had spoken up, his story might have ended differently, but instead, it was too late. He passed away within months. Bob didn't die because no one cared. He died because no one listened and good people said nothing. But here's the truth. Dr. King also believed, and the one I believe deeply, or here's the truth, that Dr. King believed and I believe deeply, is that courage does not have to be loud to be real. Courage doesn't always look like a march or a protest. Sometimes it looks like a question asked at a school board meeting. Sometimes it looks like refusing to laugh at a joke that diminishes someone else. Sometimes it looks like showing up again and again and again, even when it seems like nothing changed the last time. The beloved community that Dr. King spoke so much about was not a feeling of belovedness. It was an active practice of beloved. It was built by ordinary people choosing relationship over retreat. And I want to say this clearly because it matters. I have seen that courage here in our community. Almost exactly a year ago, our community was shaken by tragedy. A fire tore through Independence Ridge in my district over toward the east side of Independence. Families were displaced overnight. A family was lost. In the dead of winter, neighbors stood outside in the middle of the night and in the cold watching people lose everything. And then something else happened. Before there were press conferences or official plans, people just showed up. Neighbors brought clothes, shoes, diapers, food. Local landlords opened vacant apartments and homes. Churches opened doors, strangers became helpers, and a vigil formed, not out of a sense of obligation, but out of love of neighbor. In that moment, no one asked who deserved help. The only question was who needs it and how do we get it to them? Those kind of moments matter for a community. And they matter because, like Dr. King reminded us, the beloved community is not an abstract idea. It's something that we practice. It's built in moments of crisis and need when fear could have hardened us, but instead compassion moved faster. And that spirit didn't disappear once the flames were out. You see, today we have a mental health crisis response team like the Independence Fire Department's ARCH program, where paramedics and clinicians co-respond with care and not judgment. You see it in warming centers and food assistance and housing support from organizations like Community Services League, quietly ensuring families don't fall through the cracks when temperatures drop or paychecks fail. You see the work of groups like the Community of Concerned Citizens, the Independence Ministerial Alliance, and the Independence Human Relations Commission, who refuse to let inequity and discrimination and division go unnamed. You see it in the faith leaders and the civic servants in this room choosing dialogue over denial of humanity. and action over avoidance. Quietly insisting that dignity, fairness, and belonging are not optional in our community. And you see it in so many of our neighbors with no logos on their polos, no titles, who just keep choosing relationship over retreat. Dr. King warned us about the appalling silence of the good people. And what I saw after the Independence Ridge incident and so many other instances in our community was the opposite of silence. I see courage, I see solidarity, I see a community refusing to let tragedy have the final word. And I think that matters especially right now in our country. Across this country, and indeed in the last few days in our very region, we are watching federal power increasingly used not to protect, but to intimidate. We've seen aggressive ICE actions and federal overreach in places like Minneapolis. Moves that escalate fear in communities rather than build safety and trust. Again, Dr. King would have recognized this pattern immediately. Authority asserting itself through force while asking the rest of us to remain quiet. History tells us that when power demands silence, justice demands speech. That is the work before us. Not just remembering Dr. King's dream, but rehearsing it again and again, right here, together. Independence is not a community of people who shrug off responsibility. This is a place that knows how to show up, not for attention, not for applause, but because someone's dignity is on the line. So the question that Dr. King leaves us with today is not, will you speak? The question for good people is, will you refuse silence? Will you refuse silence when staying quiet feels easier? Will you refuse silence when we hope someone else will step in? Will you refuse silence by letting love move beyond a private value and allow it to show up in public? And I believe deeply that this community already knows the cost of silence and will choose courage instead. Because the most dangerous silence is not behind us. It is the silence we choose tomorrow. Thank you.